Alright, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Ovens Garage. Today I'm going to be showing you how to install some gauges in Old Blue. So what I've done here is I've picked up 4 gauges from Glowshift. I've decided to purchase the Elite 10 series gauges, which they are all electronic, and they come with a few special features that I wasn't able to find in other companies for a reasonable price. So I picked these Elite 10 gauges because they have high and low alerts built in with sound and a visual alert into the gauge themselves, and they also have a peak recall function. So that's one of the main reasons why I decided to go with Glowshift on these, is they've got some pretty cool features, and they're all electronic, so they don't have any sort of mechanical feed that runs back into the cab. They all have individual like sensors right at the point of sensing. So like the pressure sensors are right at the engine or right in the transmission, or the EGT probe, and then electronically they run back, and that's how it reads at the gauge. And what I've decided to do is I want to mount them overhead in the cab. So I'm going to put it right above the rear view mirror, and the plan is to take this gauge pod, which I believe is meant for a 3rd gen or a 2nd gen truck. This is from Autometer, if I'm not mistaken. I'll link everything that I use in this video in the YouTube description box. So I've got this 4 gauge pod and my 4 gauges. I've got trans temp, I've got fuel pressure and boost and EGT. Now I've decided, because Old Blue is an automatic truck, I think it's really important to monitor the transmission temperature. So that's one of the main reasons why I'm doing this. And then fuel pressure is really important to me. The Blue truck doesn't have an aftermarket lift pump. It has a stock lift pump right now. So I just want to see where I'm at and get a baseline. And then I also don't know whether or not this truck's really building boost that well. So I'll install that and see if I have any leaks anywhere, and then I can do a boost leak test. And EGTs is just good to monitor to make sure we're not getting too hot. So like I said, I'm going to take this gauge pod and then we'll try and make it work. I got a really good idea of how to mount this from a guy on Facebook in the 1st Gen Cummins Facebook page. He had a really good idea to mount this with some magnets, and he's sending me a couple small pieces of metal that I can mount to my windshield, and I'm hoping that it'll work. So shout out to Zach Abel. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. But that's the guy who he sent me a couple small rare earth magnets, and then he machined up a couple of small pieces of metal that hold the magnets laterally from moving, which is kind of nice. So I picked up some rear view mirror adhesive, which I'll mount those pieces of metal on the windshield, and then it should hold up the whole gauge cluster really well against the windshield, and it should look really nice. So I'm going to try and make this gauge pod work today. It might require some trimming up here on the top edge, and then I'll get it tucked up right at the top of the windshield, and then just over maybe the bit of the trim at the top. The other reason I decided to go with the Glowshift gauges is because not too many gauge companies are making it so that you can choose whatever color you want to go with. So what I decided to go with in Old Blue was white LEDs in my gauge cluster, and then on the factory tach. And so with the 7 color or the 10 color series, you can choose whatever color you want. So with this one, I'm going to be able to go right to white and set it at that and leave it at that, which is really nice. One thing to note though, I believe these Glowshift gauges are non-dimmable, but you can hook them up in a way that when your headlights go on, it'll dim down like 30% or something like that. So depending on how bright these are compared to the LEDs that are currently in my gauge cluster, I might either decide to not hook it up in a way that they dim when I turn my headlights on, or I might do it depending if they're too bright or not at night. So we'll go ahead, go to Old Blue, and then try and make this gauge cluster fit nicely in there. Okay, so the first thing I did was I trimmed these 2 tabs off, and when I mock it up on the windshield, it hits here to prevent it from going up as far as I can. So what I'm going to do is at the base of here, I'm going to trim it right across and then kind of taper it up this way at the edge, and then I'll try and form this part. So we'll cut these across and then we'll see how it fits in the truck. Okay, so I ended up using the end of this Sawzall blade, metal blade with a fine tooth, and it worked much better than the big hacksaw. So I've cut this down now on each end. I just got to get rid of the edges here, and then we'll clean it up, and then we'll go see how it fits in the truck. Okay, so in order to fit this gauge pod, I've got to remove my rear view mirror here. It's just a Phillips head screw on the bottom, and I'll take that whole mirror off. Okay, and so here's the current fitment of just trimming the backside there, like I showed you earlier. The rear view mirror is definitely going to need to move down a little bit. As you can see, just right there, that's the bottom of the sticky tab for the rear view mirror. And the fitment is not too bad right now. There's still a little bit of a gap up in the corners, and so that's the factory corner there on the gauge pod. So I'm just gonna straighten that out a little bit at the top. I'll maybe cut about a 1/4 of an inch off and straighten it out, and we'll come back and see how that fits. But overall, it fits really nice without too much work to the gauge pod itself. So all right, so just made the second pass on the sides there, and the fitment is much better. I actually really like the way this fits because the bottom of that gauge pod is just nice and level with your eyesight. And when I'm sitting from here, I'll put you at about the same level of my eye height. This is where my eye height is, and those gauge pods are just up there. So it's really no different than just looking at your rear view mirror to see where those gauges are at. And it looks like they're pointing at a nice angle to where you are in the driver's seat. Let me just show you. This is the right-hand side, and the fitment is quite nice. So I'm pretty happy with that. What I'm gonna do, because the gauges themselves are black and they also have a tinted front on them, I'm just gonna keep this gauge pod black instead of painting it gray. And it kind of accents well with the rest of the non-LE trim in here is all black. So I think that'll look nice. So I'm happy with the cuts I've made there. I've just got to wait on those magnets and metal pieces to get here, and then I'll remove this and lower it once these are installed. All right, and now I'm working on the fitment of the gauges themselves. So the gauge pod actually comes a little bit tight for these Glowshift gauges. So what I'm having to do is I'm taking the round edge of this file and opening up these holes a little bit on the right hand side, because what's happening is, one, the gauges themselves are not able to fit directly into the gauge pod, and two, when it does get in there, it's hitting on the left hand side because they're tilted towards the driver's side. So this lip that's just on the front of the gauge is hitting on the edge here. So what I've pretty much done is just filed it almost as far right as I can on these two holes for now, and then I'm going to work on those two, and I'll show you how it fits just into this one here. So I've got it to a point where I can seat it pretty much all the way back into the gauge pod, and it fits well just into this groove, and I've got it seated nicely all the way around. Of course, that'll suck in a little bit more once I push it in there, but just take note, this gauge pod needs to get filed a little bit to make sure your gauges are seated correctly. And then the gauges themselves come with these back mounts that can go on the back side of the gauges, and then it clamps itself in with these few standoffs and small nuts. So once I've got everything seated the way I want it, I can put those on and then tighten each gauge down so they don't fall out of the gauge pod. Okay, and so just looking at the wiring on the back of these Elite 10 gauges, so the top left is going to be what's going to my single power source. So the nice thing about these Elite 10 gauges is you can actually daisy chain them. So this is going to be the only set of wires going to power and ground. And then on the top right here is the daisy chain feature. And each set of gauges comes with a short length of daisy chaining wire. And all you have to do is plug it into the top right of each gauge. So I only need this wire to go down to my power source, and of course I'm going to have to extend those few wires, but then these ones can just daisy chain over to my other 3 gauges, and then it makes the install nice, easy, and simple. So this direct to my power source, these are my daisy chains, and then this bottom right is going to be my wire that goes out to the sensor. Okay, and here's an example of one of the gauges fully mounted. As you can see, it's seated nice on the top and bottom, and then I've used those standoffs to pull the gauge in nice tight to the pod. I've got all my wires underneath that bracket, so that way there's no odd tugging on the connections at the back of the pod. And here you can see my daisy chain going over to the next gauge, and then I'll do the same thing for the other two gauges. And then this will be my one power wire just running out here and then out to the power source. And then I'll have, one sensor wire per gauge going out to the sensors. So I'll get the other three gauges in here, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So the instructions for the daisy chain option are a little bit unclear in the instructions. It says if you're installing more than one gauge, use the daisy chain feature. Simply plug in the included daisy chain wire into the gauge that's already powered at port B, so the top right, and then plug the other end of the wire into the daisy chain port on the next gauge. But my question is, how would you do that how would you daisy chain another one if you have to plug in the daisy chain to the other daisy chain port? So what I'm doing is I'm taking my daisy chain top right on this one, going to the top left on the next gauge, and then my daisy chain wire is going to go in port B here and then go to port A on the following gauge. So its instructions are a little bit unclear, but it should be okay since all the wires are the same anyways. It goes the black, white, orange, and then red. All right, so I've got all four gauges mounted now. Here's what it looks like. I've tried to align them as best as I can, but I might have to rotate them a little bit once I've completely installed them to get them kind of perfectly where I want them. I used all the standoffs and metal brackets to hold in each gauge, and it actually worked out pretty nice. And then I've taken each sensor wire and then the power wire on the left side, and I've just used some zip ties to clean that up for now. And there's all my wiring at the back just to set where it is for now. And then what I can do, I'm just waiting on the magnets in the mail and those metal pieces, and then I'll be able to install each sensor on the truck and hook up all the gauges. So making some progress. Got a couple of through-hole magnets that I can use a couple of screws to mount on the back of the gauge pod itself. So I picked two spots, and then I'm going to screw these magnets on, and then I have these couple pieces of metal that the magnets themselves will magnetize to, and then these will be mounted on the windshield. All right, so I just removed the rear view mirror mount. All I did was I took a razor blade, and then I took my heat gun at about 280 and held it on the center piece there for about a minute, and then I took my razor and it just popped right off as soon as I got under the lip of the adhesive there. All right, and just showing you now, I've got the rear view mirror button remounted lower, and then I've got those two pieces of metal mounted up towards the top. I did have to relocate where I put the magnets. I found they fit a little bit better up here, and to get my alignment correct, I actually had to move this down just a bit more, but now this sits flush up against the top of the windshield, and then I've lowered my rear view mirror, so I'll throw everything up there and show you what it looks like. And so here's a quick shot. I haven't wired anything yet, but the rear view mirror is reinstalled and the gauges are installed. So here's a quick view. This is right from the driver's seat, about my eye level. So here, a quick look over to the right, I can see all four gauges, and I can still see my rear view mirror. The rear view mirror, I don't think it's too low. It seems like it's in a pretty good spot. So, all right, time to move on to installing the sensors and all the wiring. And moving to installing the pressure sensors themselves, I'm going to start with the boost sensor. This sensor is just below the intake horn here. You remove this bolt, it's 11 millimeters, and then install the 60 psi transducer that Glowshift provides. This one already has thread sealant on it, and the size on the sensor is 7/8. Alright, so there's no specific torque spec on the sensor, but snug it down so that way you don't have a leak. So you can notice there's
the inlet and the outlet to the fuel filter, this is the one you want to take off. Alright, so there was 2 small washers on each side of that banjo bolt. Got this one out now.
Alright, so don't make the mistake that I just did. I ordered the fuel banjo slash snubber from Glowshift for the 12 valve, but I ended up finding out that this is actually the wrong size. Yeah, it says 94 to 07 Dodge Ram. Oh, sorry. It says 12 valve banjo snubber valve combo. It's for a 94 to 98 Ram. I did reach out to their customer support and they recommended getting one. Maybe I just got the wrong one, but this thread size is too big. But I did end up getting just the banjo bolt. So I'm gonna run the banjo bolt. They say that the snubber prevents damage to your pressure transducer. So if there's, you know, rapid spikes on the pressure transducer, the needle on the gauge might bounce a bunch. So we'll see if it bounces with just the banjo bolt, and if it bounces, then I'll try and figure out what the correct solution is for the snubber. Otherwise, I'm just going to install the banjo bolt, and then this is a 60 psi transducer.
So I'll put in my new banjo with a copper washer on each side of this fuel line. We'll snug that guy down with a wrench. Alright, a 19mm fits on there. Snug that guy down. And then we'll take our 60 psi transducer and thread it into the end of there. Again, just snug it down so it's tight. Don't overdo it. And that's a 7/8 wrench.
Okay, for the transmission sensor, I had to pick up this piece separately. I contacted Glowshift to see if I needed this. This is called a transmission port test port extender. And so what that does is it allows the transducer to go into this extender without going too far into your transmission and damaging anything on the inside of the transmission. That, you know, if you thread it in too far. So you need that piece, and then thread that piece on. You'll need some sealant on those threads, and then some sealant on those threads because they don't come with any.
Okay, so I'm on the passenger side of the truck now, just choosing where to install my transmission temperature sensor. These are not ideal locations, but I'm going to put the sensor in the transmission port, test port, or servo test ports. I'm going to put it in the second one here. The consensus online is it seems that these are, you know, not the best places to read the transmission temperature sensors. A good option is to do it in the pan, or for us first gen guys, there's on the other side, right here on the driver's side, is the stock sensor location for the overheat. If you have an automatic transmission, the PCM will tell the transmission to go out of overdrive if it's overheating, so you can tee into there. So I might do that down the road, but for now I'm gonna put it in this port here. Alright, and I've got the sensor installed there with a transmission port extender on it. Alright, so for the EGT probe, it's an 1/8 inch MPT sensor. So the best way to tap it on the exhaust manifold is you have to take note that this is a divided manifold, and there's on the inside of this there's a piece of steel for the twin scroll to the exhaust turbine on, sorry, the exhaust housing on the turbo. The best place to do it is on the rear side here. So I'm going to tap in the center of the rear side, going straight up and down into the exhaust manifold. I'm going to progressively work my way up to an 11/32 drill bit size, and then I'll tap it with an 1/8 inch MPT tap. Alright, so first I'm going to punch the location. then I'll start with a small drill bit and work my way up. All right, and this is my last drill bit. Just pulled that out of there. And we'll keep doing that until I get all the shavings. Now I've got my 1/8 inch MPT tap, so I'll start that nice and straight. Okay, and so take a 14mm wrench and put your 1/8 inch MPT fitting into your tapped hole. You don't need any sort of thread sealant on there. And then place in your probe, position it, and then snug it down. So that's the bottom. And I go up maybe 1/2 inch and snug it down about there, pointing maybe straight back.
All right, so here's the progress update. I'm running out of daylight here and it's getting pretty cold. What I've done so far is I've put the overhead gauge cluster at mounted up at the top here, and I've wired in everything behind this piece of trim, this piece of trim, and the side piece of trim. And I've got it down all now to this point, and I'll start running them through the firewall. It looks like my EGT one might be a bit too short, so I might have to get a extended adapter for that. And then my boost pressure and fuel pressure look like they are probably long enough, and then I'll have to wire in the transmission sensor to make an extension there. I can't do that with the EGT probe because it's like a K-type thermocouple, and there's special pieces of metal in each wire, so I have to get the specific harness for that. So I've got all 4 sensors in and most of the wiring done, and I'll continue in the morning once I get some more daylight and some sunshine.
Okay, so I've got all the sensors wired up now. I'm just going to show you the boost pressure and fuel pressure, the wiring. I made it come back here and just tucked it along up this wiring harness and then through where the clutch master cylinder would go if this was a manual truck in there. My previous owner had put some wiring in there, so I'm just going to continue throwing some wiring in there and then eventually make it neater down the road. My EGT probe was just barely long enough. I had to do it on an angle there, run it along the firewall, zip tie it up, and then make my connection there. For my transmission temperature sensor, the wiring, I put it in loom, and I also wrapped it in some electrical automotive wrap, and I ran it down the back of the cab there, and then I'll get under the truck and show you where it's wired to. For the trans temp sensor, I've got it in loom. I'm gonna wrap this piece in a little bit of wrap just to protect those wires, and then I've got it zip tied along the trans lines here, just the front of the trans pan, and then it makes its way up the front of the cab there.
Okay, and the last thing to do here is my wiring. So I had to extend the harness that they gave me. The 3 main wires that I'm going to be hooking up are black, red, and white. So the black is your ground, the red is your unswitched power, and then your white is your switched power. So it only comes on when your key is on. And then this yellow wire is if you want to hook up the dimming feature. So I'm just going to have them lit all the time and see how that looks. And if I want to hook up the dimming feature, then this one gets hooked up. So that way when you turn on your lights, all the gauges dim about 30%. So in order to wire these, I picked up 2, they're called ATA fuses, or ATA circuit, from Canadian Tire. That way you can safely add them into your fuse box. So I'm going to add my switched and my non-switched power to the fuse box. All I do is I take my test light, put it to a good ground. And then from the off, when the ignition's in the off position, this one is constant and stays on when you turn the key on. And then so that's the dome lights, and then the cigar lighter, that one is switched. So if I turn the key on, so it's not on now, if I turn the key on, it's on now. So I'm going to use those two to power up my gauges. The added fuses from Canadian Tire come with these cheap butt connectors. I like to use the marine grade butt connectors because they have heat shrink terminals on the ends of them. So I'm going to cut these off and then use these marine grade ones. With these added fuses, the top one goes to your accessory, and then the bottom one just replaces whatever one was in the fuse panel. Glowshift recommends using a 3-amp fuse inline for the power source for the gauges. All right, so I've got my 2 fuse taps in. I put some more electrical tape on there. Or sorry, this is not electrical tape. That's a electrical automotive wire wrap on there just to protect it for now. And then I put my ground up here. So note, these things are going to be temporary until I add in my auxiliary fuse block in the engine bay, and then I can rewire all my accessories to a nice neat point under the engine bay. All right, so I've wrapped up the install of the wiring. Yeah, my floor is a bit dirty there, but this is a base model non-LE club cab. So I've wrapped up the wiring here, and we'll give it a shot and see how it looks. So we had some noises there. Keep in mind, I haven't programmed these yet to have the high and low alerts. I'll do that in a separate video to show how these Elite 10s work, but I've been waiting a while to do this. There we go. Now I'll have to figure out what all these buttons do, but I think one of them should change the color. Don't know which one. Oh, there we go. Second button changes the colors. As you can see, there's lots of options for colors. So I'll get all these colors dialed in, and then all the high and low peak alerts dialed in, and then I'll go for a little test drive. All right, and so I've set all the high and lows on the gauges. I'll just turn them on here so I can show you what I mean. So these Elite 10 gauges are actually pretty cool. You can set the high and low warning individually. So if you just want to focus on the high alerts, you can focus on the high alerts. If you just want to focus on the low alerts, you can focus on the low alerts. And you can turn on the sound for just the highs or just the lows, or you can have just the warning light to flash if you want just that. You can also change all the colors, and what else? You can also turn on and off the sound for the button clicks and stuff like that, just when I was cycling the key on and off. So just running through these gauges here, and also I'd like to hear your guys' opinions, so comment in the description box below. But I've set the highs and lows on some of these gauges. So for boost, this is a stock truck. I set the max to 35, so I'll just show you here. So 35 is my warning limit there. Let me know what you guys think about what I put these warning limits at. So 35 is my max there. I didn't set them in for boost. For fuel pressure, my max I set 15 PSI, and my low I set 5 PSI. I might have to change that. I'm not really sure what the correct low or high is, but I think that's about right. For my EGTs, I set the max as 1250 because I remember that Cummins recommends that the maximum operating temperature for exhaust gas temperatures is 1250 degrees Fahrenheit sustained. So anything over that is bad. I didn't set a low for that. For trans temp, I just set my low as 20 degrees. Actually, you know what? That's in Fahrenheit, so I should probably set that for anything over 32 degrees, I'd say is the low operating temp. And then the high I put as 180. So anything over 180, I'll get an audible and visual alert. So I'll run those. Like I said, let me know what you guys think for the max operating temperatures and the lowest operating temperatures for all 4 of these gauges, and comment in the description box below because I'd like to hear your guys' opinions. So now I'll take this out for a nice test drive and see how the gauges perform. So the other thing I just want to look at real quick here is just the lighting. So these are all my white LEDs on the dash, and then this is supposed to be the white-ish color on the Glowshift gauges. They're a little bit of a different white, but these are all the different colors. So like that's the white, that's a bit of a like light blue, pink, kind of reddish, orange, red, back to like I guess that one just cycles through all the colors. That one cycles through all the colors too. And then there's dark blue, green, reddish, pinkish, yellow. I'm just gonna leave them at white because I want them to somewhat match my white there, or I might put them green. I mean, my radio kind of just cycles through all the different colors too, and that's like a weird bluish tinge on the heater controls. So I mean, nothing really matches all that perfectly, but I'm happy with the look of these gauges for sure. They definitely look pretty cool up there, I'm not gonna lie. So we'll take it out for a little test drive here and see how it works. Here we go, all 4 gauges are on. I didn't set audible low alerts for the lows, but I did set audible alerts for the highs, so that way I'm not getting annoyed by the low alerts until they're up to temperature. It looks right there like my fuel pressure is sitting at about 4.5. Like I said before, I don't really know what the normal low is. I know that obviously anything down like 3, anything below 3 psi, I would say is probably like the danger zone. So maybe I'll change that low alert to 3 and we'll go from there. All right, and here's just a view from the driver's seat again. This is right at my eye level. So up to the gauges, see my rear view mirror, a couple people back there, and back to the front. All right, I'm here on the highway now. The truck is up to temperature. My gauges are reading, seems about 4 psi. It's between 4 and 5 psi for boost, for fuel pressure just running down the road. About 650 to 700 for EGTs just running down the road. And right now the trans temp is sitting at just under 100. We'll run it back down the highway here, give it a few passes and see what we can bring the fuel pressure down to and the boost pressure up to, and see what the max EGTs are as well. The nice thing about the peak recall function is, you know, once I get back to the house, I can hit peak on each one and see what my maximum values were while I was driving, and then you can reset those peaks for each drive if you wanted to. All right, so I just went for a drive and I was up to temperature. Once I get back to the house, I'll look at the peak values, but I don't think I went over like 10 or 15 pounds of boost. I didn't really go down past maybe 3.5, 4 pounds of fuel pressure. And then for my exhaust gas temperatures, I don't even think it went over like 700. And then for the trans temp, this is the max it is right now, I'm pretty sure, around 130. All right, so I just got back to the house here. I'm gonna take a look at the peak at each gauge. So while I was out, the peak was just about 15 psi for boost. Peak fuel pressure around 5 psi. I guess that's something to note. It doesn't do a min because you can't really get the min because I guess it's 0. We got just over 900 for EGT was the max while I was out there, probably on the highway. And then the trans temp, yeah, as you can see, it's about 130. I was only out for maybe like 15-20 minutes, so that might be a little bit low. Plus the temps right now are probably around maybe around -4 or -5 degrees Celsius. So there we go. That's the install of the Glowshift gauges. Like I said, I'll make a separate video on how to do all the high and low alarms and all that jazz as a separate video. But hopefully this helps here if you're looking to do some sort of gauge installation. You know, I know, like I said before, Glowshift gets a bad reputation for some of their gauges, but if you install everything correctly, as per everything that I've done in this video, I don't think you should have any issues. You know, keep in mind these are electronic gauges. I know Glowshift makes mechanical gauges as well, which they may be of lesser quality. I know these gauges are a little bit more expensive, but they're definitely worth it. I'll do probably an update video in the future, maybe after having them for a couple months, just to give you a update on the durability aspect of it and how I've liked using them over the course of a few months. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.